Good morning, everyone. Hope you all had a good evening. My presentation doesn't have a lot of live demos. I'm going to try and keep it lively because I'm sure you've all had a late night, so no sleeping. But my presentation is going to be about how we build active commerce, and I'll introduce you a bit to what active commerce is if you're not familiar. But the subtitle to my presentation is "Anything is possible with enough time in PowerShell," which is very true. So we'll talk about what is active commerce, what were our goals and challenges in automating our product builds, why did we do it, and how did we do it. So took a lot of tools to get this done, and we obviously have some very unique requirements that may not apply to your everyday Sitecore project, but the main idea here is to talk about the tools and how they might be useful to you, as well as some particular techniques. And then at the end we'll actually see what it looks like through the magic of time travel and Camtasia. So just quickly, what is active commerce? So in short, we're native Sitecore e-commerce. So we utilize Sitecore APIs to build out e-commerce functionality on the Sitecore platform. So simple things like modeling product data using Sitecore templates, obviously using the Sitecore layout engine for all our commerce pages, making some creative use of the rules engine for things like promotions and pricing rules, and obviously Sitecore security for customer logins and so on. But it also means that Sitecore interfaces are used to manage the commerce store. So with maybe some minor enhancements, you use item buckets for managing your product data. You can use the Experience Editor or even Experience Explorer to test rules-based promotions. So the idea is to create a native feel to commerce for both the developer and the content author. For you, provide all the renderings, as well as sort of a site template. And the idea here is to get to market quickly. So we've solved a lot of things out of the box, like basic product filtering, single page checkout, shopping cart, my account, and actually add a bit of a theming or skinning system to Sitecore that is, I loathe to make the comparison, but almost like Magento or WordPress, where you can drop in CSS and JavaScript to override what we've provided. And so as you can see, you can, even though we provide the storefront out of the box, you can very easily skin it to your specific requirements. But just because we provide the storefront out of the box doesn't mean, to borrow a metaphor, doesn't mean you can't take the Legos apart and put them back together differently. We do have a very extensible platform, whether it be in the data layer. You can obviously extend our product templates to your specific needs. We do have some transactional and user-generated content we store in a separate SQL database, but that's fronted with Hibernate, and that schema is very flexible. You can tap into the Hibernate configuration and extend that to your specific requirements. In the domain layer and the view model, we make use of Microsoft Unity. So you're able to extend everything from the entities to implement your own services, create your own plugins, all through the Unity container. Makes the business logic and view logic very flexible. And then, as I mentioned on the presentation layer, we have a skinning system that allows you to adapt the front end to your specific requirements. Obviously, you can build your own renderings or services on top of that domain model as well. And again, all this is running within Sitecore. So this is all in the same app pool installed as a Sitecore module on your existing Sitecore servers. But because of that, you can also utilize a lot of built-in Sitecore functionality to extend or integrate. So integrating product data can be as simple as using the Sitecore item API, or as probably over complex as using a data provider. And then even within our services, we use Sitecore as well to Sitecore pipelines and events and things like that. So if you want to extend the pricing logic, for example, we have pricing pipelines. If you want to extend order processing, we have order processing pipelines, as well as I mentioned, the ability to extend through the Unity container. So we get a lot of questions, but what does this mean? with regard to Sitecore commerce. And I would say it's different tools for different jobs. I mean, Sitecore commerce is a great solution for the upper mid-market to the enterprise, but we're targeting a much different customer. And we're targeting folks who are looking to get up and going quickly, who maybe have some multi-site small requirements, lots of small shops. And we play both in B2C and what I would call simple B2B scenarios. About 50% of our customers are actually using Active Commerce for some sort of B2B requirement. We, as of our latest versions, and we'll talk about this, we do support Sitecore 7.2 through 8.1. You can see that wasn't always the case. It took a bit of work to get to the point where we could support multiple Sitecore versions. So we'll talk a little bit about that shortly here. Our customers, as you might imagine, tend to be in verticals where commerce plus content is very important. So manufacturing, publishing associations in particular tend to get a lot of value out of Active Commerce because they're doing a lot in Sitecore already, but they need to have a storefront as well. And having a united platform for that obviously helps with maintenance and lets you do some creative things on the marketing side. And we are very dependent on our partners to do implementation. So we have a strong partner channel in the US and Canada. We're obviously looking to grow that by being here. So if you'd like to find out more, please come visit us in the exhibitor hall during lunch or one of the breaks today and talk to me or our president, Eric Allen. If you don't have time, feel free to follow up. For developers, I like to say help.activecommerce.com is a great place to start. It's our documentation, links to a ton of code samples on our GitHub, as well as our knowledge base and support tickets and so on. So enough of that. Let's get into the technical fun here about how we actually build Active Commerce. There need to be a graphic. So what were our challenges and ultimately our goals of automating? Well, first off, it was getting rid of this. This used to be our product build process. It was a nice Google Doc with a lot of steps to go through and a little helper page where we could click a button to generate a Sitecore package. So obviously not very automated, was not very repeatable, especially as we were going through the release process with a lot of release candidates, very tedious. So we definitely wanted to kill that page and manual process. We also have a lot of plugins. I think at this point about a dozen plugins for different payment gateways, shipping services, Coveo integration, reviews, and more. And for when we had far fewer plugins, it was convenient to have them all in one Visual Studio solution. Obviously, it made builds easier, but this obviously doesn't scale. And we had issues with versioning as well, as you would imagine. We couldn't independently version our plugins from the main product, so it would all have to be released as one big build. So that was obviously something we wanted to solve as well. And then initially, when we went to support multiple Sitecore versions, we took at the time what turned out to be an unfortunate shortcut of forking our repository for different versions of Sitecore. Big mistake. Obviously became pretty unmaintainable in the long term. And we wanted to be able to support multiple Sitecore versions within a single branch in our source control repo. So those two we definitely wanted to get away from. So like this cute kitten here, we asked ourselves, why do you know automate? And so we spent a good couple months mid last year taking all this, reorganizing our source control and scripting and automating all these processes for setting up environments, including development and testing environments, and automating the release process so we could reduce time there in creating product releases. reorganizing our Visual Studio solution and source control so we could support multiple versions of Sitecore and allow the plugins to be versioned independently. And obviously running all of our tests in an automated way. So what the goal was to basically to do a lot of this through PowerShell commands, be able to set up a development environment with a single line of PowerShell for any Sitecore version, toggle between those Sitecore versions for testing and development purposes, being able to run product builds on every check-in, and then being able to configure and automatically set up test environments for different versions of ActiveCommerce and Sitecore by PowerShell. So just to kind of give you the basics of each of these processes. From in the development environment, we're obviously trying to take source code and set up a local installation of ActiveCommerce on a specific Sitecore version. For a product build, we're trying to take that source code, create a build of Sitecore, and then generate a Sitecore package. And then in a test environment, we're trying to take that Sitecore package and generate and install Sitecore and ActiveCommerce for testing purposes. Now, how many out there are doing any kind of build automation with Sitecore today? All right, we got a good group then. So you all are already familiar with a lot of these challenges then. I mean, it's not just a simple .NET application that you can just push to a server. Items are important. They need to be serialized, managed, deployed. You have to install Sitecore itself and any dependent modules. So if you're using web forms for marketers or email experience manager or anything like that, those need to get installed. We have the fact we have Sitecore dependencies that need to get included, and without Sitecore having artificial Nuget packages. And we have all these maintenance tasks. We have to publish, we need to rebuild the links database, rebuild indexes. And we had some additional challenges as well as with ActiveCommerce for supporting multiple Sitecore versions. Generating those zip packages is a little tricky since that needs to happen inside a running version of Sitecore. ActiveCommerce has additional installation steps. We have to create that database, for example. We have plugins that we need to build against the latest build of ActiveCommerce itself. And then we also have a lot of integration tests, and I'll talk about this, but some of these are legacy, some of these are actual true, what I would call true integration tests that will run within the any test run. So yes, Cheeseburger Cat, you can have support for Sitecore 7.2, 7.5, 8.0, 8.1, and as opposed to an 8.2. So how do we do it? Took a lot of tools and a lot of stitching together with PowerShell. So PowerShell is up here in many colors because PowerShell unites all this together. And we'll talk about each of these hopefully kind of talk about how you guys can use them as well. So starting with Visual Studio, kind of obvious, but using Nuget for all our dependencies, separating the solution is really important. But then to support multiple Sitecore versions, we really took advantage of the power of MSBuild and the ability to have build properties that allow us to have dynamic references and dynamic code based on the version of Sitecore we're building against. For you guys, obviously using Nuget, as Sean presented on yesterday, is a great way to simplify your dependency management. And then getting familiar with MSBuild, even though we did a lot of this with PowerShell, MSBuild was really essential to a lot of these requirements. Just as an example, so this is a project file that gets dynamically included into our other projects. It's actually generated by PowerShell as part of our solution setup script. And so it specifies some details on the Sitecore version that's getting used. And you can see that we're dynamically referencing different Nuget packages as well. So actually our packages.config for each project is dynamically generated based on the version of Sitecore that we're currently building against. And then we're able to use this to do things like dynamically reference different assemblies in the project files. This also allows us to define build constants based on the version of Sitecore and do some conditional compilation. In this case, we're dynamically adding a URL hash to an image URL for Sitecore 7.5 and greater. But of course, you don't really want to use conditional compilation that much. It's kind of ugly, and so ideally, Sitecore PowerShell actually does a great job of this, putting Sitecore's version-specific stuff into its own assembly, which with the right abstraction, we certainly should be doing ourselves rather than using conditional compilation. Next up is TDS. So I think there were a couple questions about TDS during Cam's presentation yesterday, and I would say TDS is a lot more than just item serialization. And for us, it's actually pretty essential to our build process beyond just the source control of the serialized items. So we're creating update packages automatically from TDS to set up our environments. We do prescribe to the setup of having separate dev and web group environments. So TDS being able to do that for us. And now with TDS 5.5 being also able to copy over content files without a build is nice. We don't need to use copy sauce anymore. And the code gen of TDS is really nice for us too. We do use Glass Mapper for a lot of our components and templates, and some of those do benefit from code gen, since there is a pretty one-to-one use of all the fields, all the data source fields on those components. So TDS can do all this for you guys and more. The item merge tool in TDS is really cool. The new auto sync functionality in 5.5 really makes the sync process a lot easier. They have their own kind of post-deployment operations now for doing publishing and links database rebuilds and reindexing and so on. We don't utilize those ourselves, but for your project, they might be helpful. Sean mentioned ProGit yesterday during his Nuget presentation. So we obviously needed a Nuget server for Sitecore assemblies and for Active Commerce itself, so that we could reference that latest build of Active Commerce in our plugin builds. So ProGit is the repository we settled on, mostly because it actually has a built-in symbol server as well, which is really useful. So our Nuget packages for Active Commerce include PDBs and source, so that when I'm working on a plugin, if I'm running into some kind of hairy issue where it would be helpful to step into core product code, I can point Visual Studio at ProGit as a symbol server and actually step into that code. For our Sitecore assemblies, we use actually a customized version of the Sitecore Nuget package generator. And one of the reasons for that is that we include the version-specific Sitecore web config in the Nuget package, and I'll get to that. But ProGit could be a great option for you guys. There's also MyGit out there as a private Nuget repository option. But ProGit can also do actually function as a server for NPM, Bower, and Chocolatey as well. Just to give you an idea of what our Nuget server looks like, there's not a whole lot of packages up there, but as you might imagine, there are a ton of versions behind all those packages. So each Sitecore version and Rev is up there, as well as a ton of Active Commerce builds and different versions there. How many people know Slowcheetah or use Slowcheetah? So Slowcheetah was new to me in this process, and it was ultimately really useful for us. And basically, Slowcheetah, if you're not familiar, gives you the ability to do XDT transforms against any configuration file. So XDT transforms are in Visual Studio when you have that web.debug.config and web.production.config for all your build configs. That allows you to transform a web config for different builds. Whereas Slowcheetah allows you to use that same capability on any configuration file based on either build configuration or in our case, based on some custom scenarios as well. So what's happening here is that we're actually grabbing the base Sitecore web config from the Nuget package. So obviously, Active Commerce adds to the web config quite a bit, and for Sitecore, that web config is going to change based on Sitecore version. So we can grab that base Sitecore web config, apply Active Commerce specific transforms to it, apply Sitecore version specific Active Commerce transforms to it, and then ultimately have a web config that we can then apply further build-specific transforms. So the web config is going through a lot of transforms there, and ultimately our web config doesn't sit in source control at all, since it's essentially being dynamically created. So for you guys, Slow Cheetah really can allow you to do transforms on sort of the unpatchable configs. So if you want, I think it's not a bad idea for you to do this yourself, having a site-based Sitecore web config in your project, do transforms against it, so that instead of on upgrade having to mess around in the web config a lot, you can do that. You can do transforms against a new web config instead. Obviously not as big of a deal anymore in Sitecore 8.1, but the same concepts apply to things like content search configs and so on. So, NUnit web test runner. I have a feeling Alistair might be mentioning this in his presentation this afternoon, which should be a good one. So these were some concepts that he kind of came up with originally, and I know we use them a lot together on Weblog. And then, I want to get this name right. Jorge Lusar, I believe, is the gentleman who took the work that Al did and created a nice marketplace module that allows you to run NUnit tests within an HTTP and Sitecore context. And we started this before there were things like FakeDB to make Sitecore unit testing easier, so we have a lot of legacy tests that probably could become true unit tests at this point. But we also have some dependencies on Sitecore and SES that make unit testing difficult at times. And then we also have things that we just true integration tests where we want to say execute a commerce transaction within a full Sitecore environment. So we have, because of all these reasons, we have a lot of these, and we want to be able to actually run them on an installed instance of Active Commerce. So we took advantage of the fact that this is actually an Angular app, and the test results come back in JSON. So we can sort of hit this REST service as part of our build process and get back the integration test results, as you'll see when we run a build here in a bit. And then the first star of our show, Sitecore Instance Manager. How many use SIM? How many don't use SIM, so I can shame you? Ooh. SIM is a great tool for you to just manage all your Sitecore instances locally. I'm sure a lot of you guys work at partners where you're working on multiple clients, or have a bunch of research work you're doing and all that stuff. So having a way to manage all the Sitecore instances, install modules. If you don't have automation and you are in an environment where developers need to quickly get up and going on a project, just doing a SIM export and passing that to someone, having them install it is the sort of quick and dirty way of getting them up and going with a working development environment. And there's all kinds of hidden tools in SIM, tailing Sitecore logs. The Sitecore Nuget package generator is in there. It can even install MongoDB for you very quickly and easily, including setting up the service and all that. So if you aren't using SIM, you should be. If you are, explore it more, because there's probably stuff you didn't even realize was there. So we obviously needed to automate all this. So we actually wrote a PowerShell wrapper around the SIM DLLs to set up Sitecore instances. And then as well, SIM is based on pipelines. They're different than Sitecore pipelines, but you can extend them with your own steps. And we actually created a way to write PowerShell-based steps for SIM so that we could do things like that SIM can't, like set up the Active Commerce database or install update packages, which is, as far as I know, it still can't do for some reason. And then, of course, we wanted to redirect that SIM output to the shell. So this is kind of what some of our PowerShell steps look like, and this is what SIM looks like being redirected to the shell. You can see some of the custom steps in there, like setting up the Active Commerce database and installing update packages. So can you guys have scripted setting? Maybe. In the end, this did turn out to be pretty hacky. I thought about releasing this as a module here today, but in the end, I think SIM itself needs a little bit of work before this is more than just a hack. Invoking some of those classes directly was a little tricky. SIM, really wants to be initialized to its GUI, so there was a lot of extra work to make sure all the pieces of SIM were initialized properly before doing anything with it. Passing data into our PowerShell-based steps was a bit of a hack. You can read on the screen how we did it. I won't even say it. And then, two, because our instances were transient, there was a lot of deleting and recreating of Sitecore instances. And SIM really blows up if the instance hasn't been fully deleted. So there was a lot of extra work to make sure that the instance we're about to create has really been deleted and cleaned up properly. Next are Sitecore PowerShell extensions. How many using SPE? Now there should be a lot more hands in this room right now. So SPE, really powerful. Turns you into Sitecore superhero. I use it personally for, obviously this build process, but we have a Power Tools module for active commerce with all kinds of reports and product import export functionality that's all done with SPE. You can extend the content editor. You can automate almost anything inside of Sitecore. Just to add a quick anecdote, we had a customer with an import process that was run against a stale index and ended up with a bunch of duplicate products. And I think it took us about 15 minutes to write up a PowerShell script to just go through their product repository and clean up the duplicates. So even these little content maintenance things, all the way up to full-blown applications can be built using SPE. So for our build process, the remoting was really powerful. So with SPE remoting, you can execute all this outside of Sitecore from another server even. So our build server, after we set up this instance using Octopus and SIM, can execute PowerShell remotely to do things like publish, rebuild the links database, index rebuilds, even initializing the active commerce database. And the thing that was surprising to me when I dug into it was that we could use it to actually script the builds of our zip packages and get away from the designer XML. So you too can be a Sitecore superhero with SPE. And just a quick example of how easy this is. So this is doing a remote rebuild of the Sitecore links database. So we're passing a script into that session to rebuild the master and web database, links databases. And I think as of SPE 4.0, there's even the ability to wait for a job on the remote Sitecore server to complete, which is obviously really important to avoid timeouts and so on. I think as Cam once said on Twitter, if I recall correctly, this is a very sharp knife. So you do have to be careful with it in production, but for us, where we just have these Sitecore instances that go up and down, it's pretty powerful. But next up, Octopus Deploy. Do another show of hands. Familiar with Octopus, using Octopus? So our use of Octopus is actually pretty simple. We essentially use it to transfer some files and execute some PowerShell, which sounds trivial, but it's also monitoring the output of that PowerShell, reporting back on the status of that build, and allowing us to do all that file transfer securely using what are called tentacles. How cute, on these remote servers. So for you guys, it can actually probably do a lot more. Octopus, I think, is a great tool if you're looking to really do continuous deployment. And so it can automate everything from setting up IaaS sites, obviously pushing files, and a lot more. You can do gated deployments where you have the site reviewed manually before a manual approval. And that's used, I think, in what you call blue-green deployments, where you maybe have two live production environments that you switch back and forth between as you deploy new versions of your applications. And it does integrate into your existing build system. There's a couple command line tools that Octopus provides. First, Octopack to package together the deployment. It's actually packaged into a Nuget file. And then Octo-exe, which can actually push and execute that deployment. And this is just a cute picture of a cat. It's an Octopus toy of some kind. Trying to keep you on your toes. We do all this on Azure VMs. Not a lot to say here, other than the fact that it's a nice. If you're using Azure for other things, it's obviously a nice VM option. You can't do PaaS. We do have some scripts that start up and shut down our VMs for us based on business hours. So the folks watching the bottom line, like those savings, and one thing to note is that, because these instances, again, are transient, we only need them for a short time, we actually run them on the temporary storage drive of Azure, of the Azure VM, and this made the install of Sitecore and all this much, much faster. I think it was several times faster. One of the big tools from Azure we use, though, is Azure Blob storage. And this is great for us because we need a place. If we're going to run all these builds on different servers and different environments, we have a lot of file dependencies, right? Sitecore installers, module installers, license files. And we also need a place to put our build artifacts where we can get to them easily in the cloud. So Azure Blob Storage was a great way for us to do that. And there is a command line tool, AzCopy, that was really useful for us to just push and pull files. And AzCopy actually can do Delta copies. So based on the, if I already have that Sitecore installer locally that I need, it's not going to download it again for me. And this list of what you can do for you, what it can do for you is pulled right from the Azure website. So it can apparently stream video and audio too. And in the end, PowerShell, PowerShell, PowerShell. So I knew a little bit of PowerShell before we started this process, and then I basically spent 2 months writing PowerShell, and I'm hooked. It was definitely, it's a really powerful script language, obviously, and obviously the fact that Adam and Mike have brought it to Sitecore makes it even more powerful. So we use it to glue everything together. And in fact, we wrote this whole build process before even introducing a build server in PowerShell, which made it actually interesting trying to translate it into build steps in Bamboo. So to configure all this, so there's keys, there's Sitecore versions, there's paths. We actually have some JSON files that I'll show you in a second that function as configuration for the build process. And what I think is important here is that if you're going to do something this significant, first off, structure it as a PowerShell module. Take the time to do that. It keeps things organized and gives you a good idea of what are the actual functions that are going to get invoked externally from all this mess of scripts. And to store those scripts in their own repository, version them, and then also make them easy to retrieve on your build server. So we have our own Git repository that's just for managing all these build scripts. So this is JSON config for the build process as a whole. These are our globals. And then this is what a JSON config for a Sitecore instance looks like. So each plugin as well as the base product has one of these for each version of Sitecore that we're going to build against, as well as we have a collection of these for test environments for different versions of Sitecore and Active Commerce. So when we run our scripted sim, we read these values for things like the modules we want to install, obviously the Sitecore version we want to install, what packages and update packages, what bindings we need to create, including some dynamic site configs. And so ultimately I can spin up a Sitecore, an instance of Active Commerce based on one of these. I want to keep this moving so I can show you guys the demo here ultimately. But Bamboo is our build server. We used it because we kind of drink the Atlassian Kool-Aid. We use HipChat, we use Jira, we use Confluence. So it worked well in that respect. But it does lack any real templated builds. So for our plugins, we're having to make a lot of copies of the same build process, which is not that ideal. So we've been looking at alternatives, and I think Team City is probably what we're going to try next, because it does have the concept of templated builds. Quick kind of just view of what this all ends up looking like. So as a developer, I'm working in Visual Studio. I check into Bitbucket. Bamboo runs a build. It grabs any Nuget dependencies from ProGit. It's ultimately, after running the build, pushes those build artifacts as well as the automation system itself, the automation scripts, through Octopus Deploy to a build server. This is where sim executes. We set up the Sitecore instance with that latest build. Bamboo runs the integration tests, and ultimately uses Sitecore PowerShell remoting to do all the maintenance tasks and so on, and then uses PowerShell remoting to bring back Sitecore packages, pushes them in the blob storage. You can use that blob storage as well to then run automated test environments. So on a check-in basis, we're building new versions of ActiveCommerce. On a daily basis, we're setting up test environments for each version of Sitecore that we support. So let me take a look at what this actually looks like when it's running, or first off, how we use it. So for an individual developer, I can, after I pull down the automation and pull down the Git repo for ActiveCommerce as well, I can initialize my development environment for a particular Sitecore version. This takes, I think, less than 20 minutes to run. And at the end of it, you have an environment you can then interact with, do create new functionality, create your Sitecore items and sync them and so on. So you would run that for each version of Sitecore that you're developing against locally. If you want to switch the version of Sitecore that your Visual Studio is currently configured for, there's another command for that. And then we have similar commands for the plugins. And then if I just want to set up an instance of ActiveCommerce, I have another PowerShell command I can run pointed at that JSON config and specify which instance, within that config that I want to run or build.
That's 2 minutes.
Okay, so let's check the. Okay, so let's look at this quick. So set up Nuget packages. This is a local development environment. We're building update packages now. And ultimately, we're going to use those to set up the Sitecore instance. Pull down all our modules, Sitecore installers from Azure Blob Storage. Run sim. It's obviously really sped up, and you can see time slow down and speed up as we go here. Update packages. So ActiveCommerce database team. We have APIs for this, and all the fun maintenance tasks. That's development environment. So that's just about a minute of this. So here we are on Bamboo. Within Bamboo, actually running product build after a check-in. So we're grabbing both the ActiveCommerce and the automation repository. Again, we're building to update packages. And then we're doing our 3-unit test. So we'll run this first. And then when we need to push all this to Octopus, so we can actually set up a Sitecore environment there. So we'll construct a Nuget package, push that to Octopus, execute the deployment. And we have to wait at this point, so everything's happening on Octopus. Rather than the remote server in Octopus, we're going to pull back the results for us when it's done. So that's why we see all this happen at once, including the sim setup. And now we're going to go ahead and do all the maintenance tasks again. Database, publishing, link database, index database. Now we're going to execute our integration tests.
And we're going to generate the media package for that AzCopy code and push that to output. And the box code. And once that takes about 40 minutes, that's the and do better than we do normally. And finally, that's testing them. So again, all this takes is a JSON config, and it's actually installing the AzCopy product now. So we're installing on the site for the package. So again, automated sim can install commerce, and then actually after regenerating the AzCopy database, installing AzCopy plugins, so it's actually dependent on the database. Some weirdness really as we know that. And then one last publish, and MSBuild, and MSBuild. So much fun to watch. So, just quickly, some future improvements I mentioned in Team City. Really enhancing sim to make all this easier, so it's something that we want to do. The version-specific type of logic and some assembly. I thought using Docker to make some of this more efficient. And an idea there, so you don't have to reinstall Sitecore every time. Actually speed things up. And obviously improving our integration testing and running Selenium. Since we have Sitecore running, this is actually going to be, it should be pretty easy to automate since we already have a running instance of Sitecore. Thank you to everyone who helped me with this. Many people out there I talked to with built tools that made this possible. And thank you all for coming.